326 BC, the month of June. The banks of the Jhelum River, a river the Greeks called the Hydaspes. The sky above was choked with black clouds, as if nature itself already knew what was about to happen. As if the earth had been holding its breath for this exact moment. The river was swollen, furious, and rising. The first drops of a monsoon rain had begun to darken the soil. And on the far bank of that river, stood a man that even the most powerful conqueror the world had ever produced could not bring himself to defeat. His name was Porus, King Porus, master of the Parava kingdom. And on this side of the river, stood Alexander, the young king of Macedonia who in just 12 years had crushed the Persian Empire, brought Egypt to its knees, and painted the deserts of Central Asia with the blood of those who dared resist him. His teacher, the great philosopher Aristotle, had told him that India was the very edge of the world, that beyond it lay only ocean, nothing more. And Alexander wanted to touch that edge. He wanted to plant his flag at the end of the earth. He had never lost. Not once. Not ever. But fate had written a very different story for him here. On that day, Alexander's army carried with it nearly 50,000 infantry soldiers, 15,000 cavalry, and the most battle-hardened war machine the ancient world had ever seen. His greatest weapon was not his sword. It was his mind, and a military formation called the Phalanx. A wall of interlocking spears that moved like a single organism, encircling enemies, crushing everything in its path. No army in the known world had broken through it. No king. No empire. But King Porus had built something Alexander had never faced in his life. 200 war elephants. Enormous, trained, and filled with a rage that shook the ground beneath them. When they trumpeted, the waters of the Jhelum trembled. Alexander's horses, the same horses that had charged without hesitation across a dozen battlefields, began to pull back at the sight of them. His most beloved companion of 20 years, his great war horse Bucephalus, felt fear for the very first time. And King Porus himself, that colossal warrior standing nearly 7 feet tall, descended onto the battlefield mounted on the largest elephant of them all. There was no fear in his eyes. There was no exhaustion in his body. He stood like a mountain, unshakable, unmovable, and utterly prepared to die for the soil beneath his feet. The battle began. Alexander moved in darkness. Under the cover of a raging storm, he secretly ferried a large portion of his army across the Jhelum under the cover of rain and thunder. A flanking maneuver so audacious that most commanders wouldn't have dared attempt it. But Porus had eyes everywhere. When the sun rose, both armies stood face to face across a blood-soaked field, and there was no escape for either side. The Greek cavalry struck first, fast, precise, and lethal. But the Indian army drove them back behind a wall of elephants. The elephants then turned on the Greek infantry, trampling, scattering, and breaking Alexander's legendary phalanx for the very first time. For the first time in 12 years of war, Alexander's soldiers stumbled. For the first time they stepped backward. That moment, the moment the Greek historians never fully recorded, the moment the invincible army retreated. The battle raged for hours. The Jhelum ran red. The screams of dying men, the clash of iron, and the thunderous cries of the war elephants filled that ancient field with a sound that history would never quite capture in words. Alexander threw everything he had, attacking from the left, the right, the rear, splitting his forces and pressing from every angle. Slowly, the Indian formation began to buckle. The elephants grew exhausted. And after catastrophic losses on both sides, the Parava army finally began to withdraw. But King Porus did not withdraw. Wounded, soaked in blood, pierced by countless spears and arrows, he remained on his elephant in the middle of the battlefield. When his own soldiers begged him to retreat, he refused. Only when his great elephant itself finally sank to its knees did Porus descend to the earth below. And it was then that Alexander sent his messenger forward. When Porus was brought before Alexander, wounded, exhausted, but with his head held high, Alexander asked him how he wished to be treated. And the answer Porus gave echoed through centuries. He said, "Treat me as one king should treat another." Alexander went silent. There was something in those words. A dignity. A pride. A quality Alexander had not encountered in 12 years of conquest across 3 continents. He had defeated emperors who wept. He had broken kings who begged. But this man he had just defeated, stood before him without a trace of surrender in his eyes. Alexander not only freed Porus, he returned his kingdom to him in full. But the real story begins right here. After this battle, Alexander's army refused to march forward. 12 years of war. Thousands of miles from home. And now, this one Indian warrior had broken something deep inside them. something no Persian sword or desert heat had ever managed to touch. The soldiers mutinied. Alexander pleaded. He gave speeches, he wept, he locked himself inside his tent for 3 days in silence. But the army would not move. And so it was, on Indian soil, that the greatest conqueror the world had ever known was finally stopped. The edge of the world that Aristotle had promised him, he never reached it. He turned back. And on that long journey home in the city of Babylon at just 32 years of age, Alexander the Great was dead. Greek historians recorded this as Alexander's victory. They wrote it that way. They made sure of it. But buried between the lines of history lies a truth that refuses to stay silent. The army that had never stopped in India. The king who had never turned back from India. And the warrior who had supposedly lost, King Porus, walked away with his kingdom intact, his head raised, standing tall on the soil of his own land. History is always written by the victors. But sometimes, the greatest victory in history is the one that was never recorded.